Good morning. Welcome to Pecan Corner. I'm Tina and today I'm making Thanksgiving dinner. I know it's Thanksgiving Day and we probably won't get this up for a week, but I'll go ahead and Paul and I would like to say happy Thanksgiving to everybody. We have so much to be grateful for and thankful for, and it's so good to take one day when everybody's unified in wanting to be grateful for what we have. I make my dressing the same way that my grandmother made it, although mine's not as good as hers is. But I made my cornbread. Usually I make it the day before. This time I made it 2 days before because I had so much of it to do, and I wanted it to be. You don't want it completely dry, but just some of the moisture out of it. So I've made up 5 packages of cornbread mix. I can make cornbread from scratch, but it just never has turned out very good for me. And so I tend to always use a cornbread mix, and not corn muffin mix, but cornbread. We don't like that sweet stuff that you get when you get corn muffin mix, so just be sure. But any good yellow cornbread mix will work. So I made 5 packages of that, and then my grandmother always used canned biscuits in hers. So I baked 4 cans of the small canned biscuits, just the cheap ones, and cut them up into pieces, and they've been drying also for the last couple of days. And like I said, they too still have quite a bit of moisture in them, and that's just fine. That's just fine too. Also in our dressing, I use onions and celery when our oldest son isn't around. When the only thing in the world that he doesn't like, and he's never liked it, is celery, and he can tell when it's in there. So have to make him a separate pan. But he's not here this year with us, so it'll just be, I'll have some celery in there. And this is about a 1.5 cups of celery, or 5 ribs. And then this is 1.5 large onions. I slice up boiled eggs and put in ours, and so I've got some boiled eggs here. I'll probably use 4 or 5 of them. And then Paul taught me to save all of my my ends off of my onions and the ends off the celery, and then add some carrots and boil that in with my stock when I cook my giblets, and that will make the broth real flavorful that we make our giblet gravy out of. I forgot to get it out so far, but I use, if I don't have my own homemade chicken stock to use, I just use canned chicken stock for the dressing. We also use sage, and so I have a brand new can of rubbed sage. One year I thought I had plenty, and it turned out I didn't, and I discovered that there's not any other good substitutes. Marjoram and things like that just do not make the difference in dressing. You're better off without anything than to try to substitute. So this year, every year I make sure I have a brand new box of rubbed sage. Ground sage is a different product. I'm not sure if it's a different plant. It's a lot cheaper, and so it's real tempting to buy what's called ground sage, which is just the ground up leaves, but I think it's a different plant because the flavor is different. So what we get is rubbed sage, and it's kind of fluffy. So it's obviously kind of like horehound. It's probably that sage that's kind of soft and fluffy when you see the leaves. So that's what that is, and that's what we use. And then just salt and pepper. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to saute my onions and my celery so that before I put them in. Most of the time they'll cook all the way through if you bake your dressing long enough, but unfortunately one year the dressing didn't, for some reason these things didn't cook, and we didn't like that. So now I go ahead and saute them in advance just to be certain that they're completely cooked. I'll be back when I get that done. All right, I'm going to cook my dressing this time in my roaster. It's just a lot easier, and it saves having to use the oven. I've put my breadcrumbs, both my cornbread and my biscuits, in here, and now I add my seasonings before I add any of my liquids. And for this, I'm going to add about you don't want too much salt, you need some, but I'm going to add about 2 teaspoons of salt. Remember, you've already got some salt in your, in your broth and in your cornbread and those kinds of things. And then I'm just going to give it a little sprinkle of black pepper, not a whole lot. Now my sage, this is where I'm heavy-handed. This just depends on your taste. Add about 2 tablespoons and then stir it up, and here's how I do it. Dressing is one of those things that you can use a recipe, but you're still always going to end up having to go by your own taste. So the more you make it, the better you'll be at it. I've learned that I cannot make a good batch of dressing if I make a small batch. That's why I'm showing you a giant-sized, batch of this. It freezes great, so you can make this big batch and you can put it in several containers in your freezer, and then you can have it year-round. Everything I've read about canning, if anybody knows about how to can these things, talk to me. But everything I've read about it, I'm betting they're going to say it's not safe to can dressing because it's just going to be so gummy in there. It'd almost be like a pumpkin or something where, it's going to be hard for that heat to go all the way through it. So my suggestion is to freeze the excess, but if you know better, I'd love to hear from you and be interesting to learn. So, post down in the comments or post a link if you've got a video on how to do it. What I actually do is I do it by smell. And if I can smell my sage, that's when I stop adding it in. One of my grandmothers used enough sage that the dressing was almost green. Another one had a much lighter hand on it. So I've added another couple of tablespoons. So now I'm up to about 1/4 cup of sage. And that is starting to look, I can see the sage on every piece. And let me see if I can scoop out a little bit for you to look at. See if I can show you. Oops. There we go. Can you see that? Can you see that all those little green specks, all those little specks, that's all sage. That's actually about perfect the way that it should look. And it smells good. So that's about 1/4 cup of rubbed sage, and you can add more if you like it more. My first mother-in-law didn't use any sage at all in her dressing, and hers is very good and is very different from this type. So some of these days I'll make hers, and you can see how that was done. Now I'm going to add my sautéed vegetables. Stir them right in here. And they got it. They're nice and soft. Stir that all in. Get those mixed in real well. Dressing is such a personal thing, and everybody makes it different. I use boiled eggs in mine. I've seen people actually put mix raw eggs in with milk and use that to moisten their dressing with instead of the broth. Of course, up north, people make bread dressing, with dried bread and no cornbread. So it just everybody has their own they're on. I'm going to wait and put the eggs in last. So I'm going to start adding my broth here. Stir after each can. This is another place where you kind of have to be sensitive. You certainly don't want your dressing too dry. It has to have enough moisture to be nice and fluffy, but at the same time, of course, you know, we don't want it soggy either. So there again, it's a question of just keep doing it. Anytime you do something like this where you make it and it doesn't turn out the way you want it, make it again really quickly. Like make it again the next week, so that you keep trying while it's fresh on your mind the things that you want to learn to do differently. That's how I learned how to bake bread. Is I thought, dadgummit, you know, women have done this for thousands of years. I can learn this too. And so I just took a long weekend and I just started making bread and throwing it away and letting Paul taste it, and he'd offer suggestions, and then I'd throw that batch away and make a new one. And yes, I wasted a lot of flour, but I learned finally how to make bread. And I got good at it, and I got to where I could, you know, make it turn out consistent each time. So that's the secret to things like this as well. I think I'm going to add one more can of broth. That's 4 cans of broth that I've added. Again, that's going to vary and these are 14-ounce cans. So that's, let's see here. Okay, 2 cups is 16 ounces, so 32 ounces is a quart. So you're talking maybe, if it's your own home canned broth, maybe 1.5 quarts of your own home canned broth. Oh yeah, that looks just about right. Let me show you. See if you can see can you tell how that looks? Yeah. All right, now I'm just going to add my eggs. I've sliced them. I have one of those little egg slicers, and those are very handy to have. But you can cut them up any way you want to. You can chop them up or cut them into quarters. And then I'm just going to stir that in. My grandmother used to actually mix. She did chicken and dressing, and so she would actually mix some giblets and meat in with hers. But I don't do that. I use all my giblets in my gravy. All right, now I'm gonna put it on at 325 degrees, and I'm gonna let it cook for at least a couple of hours. But I'll check on it in that time, make sure it's not burning. All right, now while the dressing is cooking, I'm making my giblet gravy. I've got my giblets in here, and I've added 4 cans of canned broth again. So there's about 1.5 quarts of home canned broth, or 2 quarts of broth if you like a lot of. I like a lot of gravy. And I've got all my trimmings from my vegetables along with some carrots that I'm cooking up here. I'm also going to, a little bit later, I cooked the giblets from a turkey that I canned last week, and I've saved them aside. I'm going to add them in after a while when this is cooked a little bit. Then when this is done, I will strain all of these things out, and I will chop up the meat from the giblets to put back in. Alright, see you guys in a couple hours. Hello, welcome to Pecan Corner. It's Thanksgiving Day, and today I'm making my grandmother's potato rolls recipe. These are Mama Myrt's potato rolls. So this is a great recipe for a good, easy, quick yeast roll that you can save the leftover dough in the refrigerator and just pull out a few of them each day and bake them up as you need them. It doesn't have to have a separate riser or anything. So I hope you'll enjoy this. Okay, here we go. Mama Myrt was my father's mother, and my my autumn leaf, Jewel Tea autumn leaf mixing bowls were hers, as was the dragon teapot. She also gave me a beautiful set of a tea set, the Moss Rose tea set. So kids, when y'all start looking for things, that's where those came from. Mama Myrt lived into her 90s, and except for about the last year or so, she did her own cooking and did her own thing, and she was a really remarkable person. We loved her a lot. So it's good to have these kinds of foods on our holidays to remember those that have gone before us. It's kind of a touchstone to bring them to our mind. Mama Myrt was an early telephone operator back in the early days, and she was always worked, and even while her kids, when her kids got old enough and were in school, and she went to work again. And so she told me that when my dad and his brother were in high school, and if they, that everything had to go through the operator, or even local calls back then, and so she would look and see who it was they were talking to. If they were talking to somebody she didn't like, she'd just pull the plug at the switchboard. So, kids, if you think it's bad having your moms look at your texts now, just imagine if your mother was a telephone operator. Don't think that it's a new thing. It's always been that way. All right, I'm only making a half a batch today because I don't want to have a bunch of leftovers. There's just it's just me and Paul, and our sweet friends Herb and Renee are coming over. So we had opportunities to go out of town, but it was just too much to do and too many other things going on. So we decided to stay here. All right, we're going to use 1/2 cup of cooked potatoes, and they're kind of mashed up. They'll finish mashing after I get them in my bowl, mixing bowl. And 1.5 cups, and 3/4 cups of potato, the water that you boiled that potato in. It should be cooled down to lukewarm. 1 egg. 3/4 teaspoon of salt. I'm going to use this finer salt so I'll get it right. There's a half. There's a half. Half of that. So that's 3/4. Oops. And I need, here we go. Her recipe calls for shortening, but I don't, since I can't get anything without any shortening that doesn't have soy and doesn't have hydrogenated fats in it, I now use coconut oil in place of shortenings. It still gives you the same, whatever it is about a fat that will get hard, but coconut oil is so much healthier for us. So I'm going to use 1/3 of a cup of coconut oil. It's a little bit much. There we go. Okay, and 1/3 cup of flour, of sugar, sorry. There we go. Now I'm going to add my yeast to this mixture, and we'll set it aside while I mix my flours up. I want 1 tablespoon of yeast, and I'm using instant yeast, but you can probably use either kind with this particular recipe. Some recipes you can't exchange them, but in this one I think you can. the difference between instant yeast and regular yeast is instant yeast has citric acid in it to help it rise faster. Let's see if it has the ingredients on here. I know it has citric acid in it, whereas regular yeast does not. Ascorbic acid, excuse me. It has ascorbic acid in it, and that helps it, really kick-starts the way it rises. All right, now we're going to set that aside. And I'm going to use one, two, three. I'm going to start with 3.5 cups of flour, and then if I need to, I'll add about another quarter cup. I think this should be just about right. All right. Now I'm going to mix my wet ingredients into my flour here, and then I'm going to take it over to my mixer. If you're doing this by hand, you can add a couple of cups of flour and beat it real good first, and then add the rest of your flour as you need it. In this case, I'm going to use my stand mixer, so I don't need to add that separate flour. Be right back. All right, now the pan I'm going to use to bake these in, you can bake them in anything you want to bake them in. I'm going to use my mother-in-law's pan. This is what Paul's mother always baked her rolls in, so that's another touchstone for our holiday meals. And I'm using her trick. Thelma always saved her butter wrappers. She just fold them inside like that and stick them in the freezer. And then when she needed to grease a pan, she had the butter wrapper to use, and it's perfect. It's got just enough fat left on it that it works great for greasing that with. I'm going to shape these into rolls and put them in the pan. I'm going to bake them at 400 degrees for about 30 minutes until they're nice and brown. Don't have to let them rise. You can also just set them aside in the fridge until you're ready to bake them. This is a real nice soft dough. It feels good to work, but it's not sticky. It feels like it almost wants to be a little sticky, but it's not. So it works out. It makes it easy to fashion. If it is a little sticky, just add a little more flour. No worries. Put a little flour on your hands. Perfect. I haven't made these in a while. We haven't been eating a lot of bread. Paul used to love to have bread, but these days he was telling me, what was it you were saying the other day, Paul, about the bread, that now that you're eating all these healthy, made from scratch foods, you're not feeling that need for them?
Homemade rolls are different than store-bought stuff, but yeah, just
all right, there we go. All right, now as soon as the oven heats, I'll pop these in the oven and then I'll show you the finished product. Okay, 30 minutes in the oven and they turned out beautiful. Here's a second use for a butter wrapper. Great for just brushing some butter over the tops of your rolls once they're done. This recipe made exactly 12 rolls, and the double recipe, which is what she usually made, and it's the double recipe that I'll put down in my comment for you. It would make 24 rolls, so 2 pans. So this is easy and quick, and there we go. It gives you a nice homemade roll without waiting, without having to wait for it to rise. You can see there, it's just got a nice flaky interior. All right, thanks you guys. All right, now I'm ready to make my giblet gravy. I want to show you the beautiful color of the broth from the yellow onion skins and the carrots. They really just made the broth a beautiful, beautiful color. So and it's also got nice flavor. Before I add anything to it, everything else is already cooked that I'm going to add. I'm going to thicken the broth. And I have to tell you, Paul, you know, it doesn't matter how long we're married, he still teaches me new things all the time. So the latest thing is Wondra flour. He had me get some for something else that he wants to make, and he said, oh, it's great to use in thickening sauces and gravies with. And I thought, flour's flour. Well, it's not. Wondra has, let me see here. It's regular flour, but it's also the texture of it. It doesn't clump up. So you can whisk it into a gravy or a sauce, and it doesn't have those clumps, so you don't have any lumps in your gravy. I thought it used to have cornstarch in it, but it doesn't now. The only ingredients are wheat flour, malted barley flour, and the various vitamins. But so it's something about the texture of the way it's
milled very fine.
It's milled, okay, yeah.
Very, very fine.
Very fine, okay. So that's what it is the way that it's milled. So I'm going to bring this to a boil, and then I'll add my Wondra to it. All right, now I'm going to add some Wondra. I'm just going to sprinkle it right in. This is not steaming too bad, but if it is, you can just scoop it in so that you don't get steam into your package. I've put maybe about 3 tablespoons in there. I might want to add a little bit more. Give me a spoon. There we go. Okay, we're going to end up with about about a quarter cup of it in there. And that's all it took. It's just, now I want to continue to stir it until it thickens up, but there's no, you know, I didn't have to mix my flour with water before adding it, and I'm not having to strain any lumps out or anything like that. It just mixed up just beautifully into that hot liquid. So that's all it is. Giblet gravy is a very thin gravy, so we don't make it thick like we would say a cream gravy, or what's the same thing as a bechamel sauce is what we call cream gravy. Giblet gravy in our family is almost more like an au jus. It's just slightly thickened, and I'm going to add. I've taken the meat off of my neck that was in there, and if you have a heart and a gizzard, slice them up. They weren't with it this time. And your liver, chop your liver up, and these are all completely cooked. And if you don't have, like I didn't have the giblet, the gizzard and the heart, So to get a little bit more meat, I just added a little bit of turkey meat. But your neck bone has a lot of, after it's cooked, you can pull a lot of meat off of it. I'm also going to add 1 sliced hard-cooked egg. I like that, and it adds a little bit of good extra flavor too. And that's it. There you go. Now your giblet gravy is done. It's completely finished and ready to serve, and I'm just going to take it off the stove, off the heat, and set it aside. I've got my potatoes ready to cook, and I'm going to make some more now. Be right back and I'll show you how beautiful the dressing looks. And there we are. I've got, since we've got company coming, I'm afraid I'll forget to record the final product, so unfortunately I can't put the whole thing on the plate. But I wanted to show you what the dressing looked like. It's delicious and fluffy and just the right texture. It was done at 325 in 2 hours in my roaster, and that gave it nice brown edges. If you don't want brown edges, about an hour and a half would probably be good enough for you. Also, if you want it a little bit richer, you can add at the beginning when you're heating your broth, you can melt a stick of butter and pour over it too. So I hope that you'll try this and maybe share your own dressing recipes. It's a lot of fun to try different things. And I don't know why we always wait till the holidays to have these meals, but dressing's one of my favorite foods, so I hope that we'll have it more during the year. All right, thanks so much, and happy Thanksgiving and Merry Christmas to everybody.